Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Shogun episode 4. It's called the Eightfold Fence. So spoilers for the episode as always. So this one definitely slowed down a little bit compared to episode 3, which is not to say it's a complaint. I mean the ending was obviously pretty bombastic. they really like, I enjoy a good bit of gore, so I appreciated the chaos of the ending. But really, what this one did for me was a lot of the one-on-one character moments, particularly Mariko and Blackthorn and their romance kind of starting to blossom, even though they start off in kind of a colder place early in this episode, where she's kind of, reaffirming kind of the rules and that he's not allowed to just go to his ship, that Toranaga still owns all this stuff. Toranaga's barely in this episode. He pieces out quite quickly after they arrive to the village. But we get a lot of that. We get a lot more Fuji this episode because Fuji is tasked with being the oh god, what was the word? Basically the wife. I can't remember the exact word. Sorry, but the wife of Blackthorn, to sort of look after his house that he's being given, to be kind of his head of staff and potentially fulfill the roles of a wife and all the other ways. He's not that enthusiastic about that, though. He's kind of like, I'm sure she's nice, but I wasn't really asking for this. In fact, he's kind of got that opinion about all of it. He's like, wait, you're giving me a big house, you're giving me a staff, you're giving me all these things. What the hell is this? How long am I supposed to be here? Only to find out that it's going to be 6 months at least. In fact, the original estimate's a year, and it's kind of softened back to 6 months without him knowing it. So it's probably going to be a year, assuming they're not all dead by the time that comes to pass. But like, Fuji gets some interesting things here because she doesn't want to do this. She obviously went through the death of her husband, the death of her child. When Mariko tells Blackthorn this, he's like, wait, why is she not grieving? Why has she been given this task? And she's like, well, it's her duty. This way she can serve her lord. And that's where she gets into the story of the Eightfold Fence, which is... it sounds really unhealthy to me. Now, I'm no psychology expert. I don't know for sure if this is unhealthy, but it kind of sounds like compartmentalization in like a sort of bad way, and like a sort of bottling things up until they're ready to erupt kind of way. She talks about how in your mind you build this fence. This is something that her grandmother, her mother told her this. You build this wall in your head that you can retreat behind. So even though in the world you're smiling and bowing and you're being nice and doing all the decorum stuff, in your head you're actually far away. You're in your happy place, for lack of a better term. And it sounds a little unhealthy to me, but it does raise this interesting idea that Blackthorn's presence is not just like upset the political climate in Japan, because obviously it's interfering with all these relationships that various groups of Japanese clans have with the Portuguese and have with other groups. But it's also kind of like upsetting the balance, perhaps in a good way, for some of the individual characters, because he is this more abrasive, more reckless kind of character. And this is perhaps why Mariko is attracted to him by the end of the episode. I think one of the more obvious things about why they might fall for each other is, especially from Blackthorn's side of this, is that she's literally the only person he can talk to. So it kind of makes sense he'd grow attached. At the very least, that part like was already there. It's like the only person he can really talk to. So that instantly just puts them together a lot, if nothing else, on top of like him feeling like he can't connect to anyone else. Again, he's not looking for romance. He's repeatedly kind of like said, no, I don't want to pillow with anyone and things like that. He doesn't want to take advantage of this young woman who is clearly upset about the death of her child and husband. But it's actually this idea of like her fulfilling her role and trying to do it the best she can, whilst he's also trying to be respectful about it, but doesn't want to go through with anything, sexual or anything like that, is actually kind of one of the things that I think makes both Fuji and Blackthorn endearing in this episode. And there's a really great scene where he's given some of his guns from his ship, which he wants to carry with him to this training where he's supposed to train Toranaga's men, particularly Yubashige's regiment, and like his ways of combat. And we'll get to that in a minute. But there's this kind of standoff where Yubishige's nephew, who I think is Omi, right? Forgive me, like I'm really worried that I'm going to mix up Omi and Taranaga's son, who also stays behind in the village. I think he's Nagakado though, right? I think he's Nagakado, and I think Omi is the nephew of Yubishige. If I'm mixing those two around, forgive me, but I think I think I've got it right. He doesn't want him to keep his guns. He doesn't want Blackthorn to have his guns because, you know, he sees it as a risk. Even though the whole idea of him being named this, like, part of the clan and being given this title and house is like, no, he's one of us now. He's to be pretty trusted. Obviously not with, you know, within reason. Like, they're not going to let him get away with murder or anything, but, like, clearly this shouldn't be a big deal. But Taranaga's not actually here to sort of enforce this necessarily, so he kind of has to play by their rules. And Blackthorn doesn't want to give up his guns, which, you know, for a brief moment, he seemed more American than he did British there for a second. But it's actually Mariko who steps in and says, give them to Fuji. Fuji sort of says, tell him to give them to me. And the idea is that they're not going to the men that Blackthorn doesn't trust, but Fuji's job is to sort of like protect his belongings and like run his house. She'll defend them with her life. So he's kind of reluctant about it at first, but he hands them over. And then the nephew character, Omi, says, hey, like, now give me those guns to her. And Fuji, like a little badass, just points one of these old pistols at him and scares the shit out of him. And it's kind of a cool little moment, particularly because for the first time in 4 episodes, this character Fuji just did something of her own agency. I mean, yeah, she's kind of doing it like under service to someone else, but this choice she makes here, one, it shows you that she's smart because she thinks of this kind of loophole that the guns can stay in the household, but they're not, you know, going with who Blackthorn doesn't want them to go with. And then her defiance in this moment, sort of like pushing back against this young nephew who wants to kind of prove himself and be the ruler of the town someday. Like, that's kind of what his goal is, to the point where it seems like he might be scheming later on. His girlfriend is like, you should be ruler of the town, and is kind of talking in his ear. It was making me think that he's teaming up with the son. They're up to no good to try and prove themselves. Yeah, I thought this was a really cool little moment for her. Because she's not been a bad character by any means, but she's been very much just defined by what's happened to her up until this point. And this felt like she was taking back some control of her life. And it's like, okay, I'm in this position. I'm supposed to look after this guy, this, you know, quote unquote barbarian. I'm going to do a good job of it. And I think part of the heart of this show so far is seeing some of the bonds that are forming and like the respect that's happening over these thresholds, over these language barriers, over these culture barriers where we're supposed to not like each other. We're supposed to be mistrusting each other. But, you know, we've been seeing him gain a little bit of respect from Toranaga, from Mariko, and now with Fuji. And there's a few sweet scenes here where he tries to apologize, again, through Mariko for, like, acting a bit abrasive with her. He gifts her one of the guns and says it's hers. Right? He gives it as a gift, and he's going to train her to use it. And she, in turn, gifts him her father's swords, because with his new role, he should be walking around with swords. It's part of the whole package, and she wants him to have her family's. So it's actually a very sweet scene, and it was these moments in this episode that I was really enjoying. And like I was saying, you know, that conversation that Mariko had with him about the wall and about bottling things up and going to your happy place. It's almost like for a brief moment when she pointed the gun, Fuji was coming out from behind the wall that she was hiding behind and did something. And it felt kind of empowering in that moment. And it kind of feels like whether he's intentionally doing this or not, Blackthorn might be having this influence to an extent on some of the people he's interacting with. And it's kind of seeing what that, you know, introducing that extra element into this society is maybe concocting. In fact, I laughed a lot actually because there's a little earthquake at one point, and I also went, what the hell is that? Because I didn't realize it was just an earthquake. I'm so used to earthquakes being presented by buildings, right? Usually you see buildings and the rubble falling and the camera shakes, but because they're on like a little shoreline, they're just sitting on some rocks, and there's just a sort of rumble noise, and he's like, what the hell is that? And she's like, it's a baby earthquake, and he's like, what's that? Which makes sense, right? He's from the UK and has spent most of his life in waters around Europe, by the sounds of it. He's probably never felt an earthquake. He doesn't know it exists. So that was really funny to me. That was like an oddly relatable part because I've never felt an earthquake. So yeah, and Japan has lots of earthquakes. It's kind of known for it. So yeah, which I assume this is true. What she says about their houses, like the reason why their houses in this time period are designed and built the way they are is because they're basically expecting them to fall down during an earthquake and then they can be rebuilt quickly. That's why they have the designs they have. I mean, I don't know for sure if that's true, but that sounds like that. I mean, that's why Japan has that. You know, it's a very distinct style of home or building you can think of when you think of this period in Japan, right? I feel like there may be some truth to that. That may be a genuine like bit of trivia. Is that, you know, long before we had engineers sort of thinking of ways to make sure buildings don't fall down in severe earthquakes, the simple solution was make sure they're quick to put up, which makes some sense. So that was just a fun little tidbit, I thought. But yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah, the big emotional thing with them towards the end of the episode is she comes out and catches him naked because he's going to go for a sit in the hot tub, as it were, a natural hot tub, a little spring. She cracks a little joke about how she's happy that he's decided to bathe, which is a nice callback to episode 2. They have this scene where they just start talking about, you know, what he'd be doing on a night like this in London, and he starts describing what he'd do with her. So it kind of sounds like he's talking about a date, where he's like, hey, I'll take you to a play, we'll go see the Queen, we'll walk across the Thames and all this stuff. And it's, you know, the music's playing, they're sitting back to back, the moonlight shining on them. It's all kind of romantic. There's also some teases here of what her life used to be. Just some quick glimpses, but there's just a little teensy bit of like her, you know, she says she's not mentioned her family name because it's really well known in Japan. And there's like a quick glimpse to a younger version of her, I presume, in the snow, screaming or at least looking very distressed. Not sure what that's about. That seems like something we're going to get into. And maybe how she ended up in the position she's in ultimately is maybe this dark or tragic past that she has. Very curious, certainly. I thought the scene was well performed. It felt like the first time they're overtly kind of flirting, if you want to call it that. Or at the very least, Blackthorn's kind of describing this very romantic night, effectively. And talks about forgetting yourself as you look into the water. It's all very nice. And it leads to this, I thought, really well shot scene where they establish early on that the courtesan, or the courtesan's a prostitute, the wife, Fuji, right? She won't go to bed until Blackthorn does. So she sees that he's asleep and she slides the door shut, and the camera just stays there. It waits a few seconds and then the door slides open again. And you don't see who it is quite. You can tell it's a woman, but you don't see quite who it is. It's Mariko, right? And she kneels down, she wakes him up, she stops him from saying anything, and it's just this very intimate, sort of, you know, very dramatically lit start of a love scene. And that's it, right? The next morning, he's in a very good mood, and Mariko's like, oh yeah, we sent a courtesan to your place as a gift. I trust it treated you well. And he just sort of like says, oh, that was a very thoughtful gift. Now, I'm pretty sure he knows she's lying and that was her, and she's saving face here for whatever reason. Not that she seems like she's ashamed or anything like that. She's got a smirk on her face as she says this, but it's more maybe this idea that it has to be secret, or it has to be this, or it has to be that. But I think he knows it was, I mean, he could see it was her. It wasn't that dark. And it was a really interesting little bit, especially the way he turns and looks at Fuji, who's sitting on the other side of him, and she just kind of looks confused because, yeah, like, you know, like he tries saying her name a couple of times and he kind of gets it slightly wrong, and it's not just Fuji. There's a whole, you know, structure to it which I'm not even going to try and replicate. So yeah, I thought all these scenes were really well done. They were my favorite part, other than maybe the gore of the final scene, because that was a lot of fun. But like, as far as the character drama goes, which is what the show is really leaning on here, and how Blackthorn is influencing these people around him, I thought that was really good stuff, and I was enjoying the characters bonding. Even if it was a less action-packed episode to do all this stuff, I liked a lot of these scenes. The other stuff, of course, is that Blackthorn is training the men, and he realizes quite quickly that he's going to be hopeless actually training them in infantry tactics because he's never been that. But he's like, hey, I know naval combat, I know cannons. So he quickly pivots to showing them how good he is with the cannons. And he sets up some targets, and Yubashige and all the others, like, you can't hit a target that size with a cannon, it's too inaccurate. And then he does it. And then throughout the episode, there's montages and stuff, and he's clearly sort of teaching them how you do different things. Like, this will change the spread of the cannon, this will give you a different type of blast, or whatever. Here's how you account for different types of target, different sizes of target, so on and so on. It feels like he's going through all that stuff, and they're all training. What this builds up to, though, is that eventually Ishido's men show up. And it's made very clear in this episode, right, that Yubashige is still wanting to be loyal to Ishido. He thought Toranaga was going to die back in early episode 3 and was surprised that he made it out. That wasn't the plan. And he even bemoans to his nephew that he's like, Ishido's going to think that he's betrayed him, and he's not. He really wants to be on Ishido's side, which is why the ending's actually pretty darkly funny, and I really enjoyed this element of it, is that Ishido's men come in towards the end of the episode and say, hey, you've been summoned back to Osaka, you have to come and prove your loyalty to the council, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, hey, stay a day, let me show you what we're doing with the cannons, because his plan ultimately is to offer all this to Ishido. But of course, Taranaga's son, Nagakado, is there, and he's like, why are these guys here? Why are you showing them the cannons? What are you doing? Like, and this is the thing, he obviously goes above and beyond by the end of this episode, and arguably he's a bit too bloodthirsty to prove himself, but he is right to suspect Yubashige. Everything he's been thinking about Yubashige is correct. Yubashige is a little snake, and he wants to give this all to Ishido, which is why it's really funny at the end when Nagakado takes it upon himself that he's ordered some secret cannons based on Blackthorn's teachings, seemingly, because they're very accurate. Ishido's men get cannoned. That is the final scene of the episode, is cannons come in, and we get explosions of gore, there's intestines flying, all this shit. It's great. I loved it. I know I'm a sick bastard, but it was fun. And then my favorite part, though, is the leader of the men, the one who's in charge of this little group for Ishido. He's like missing like his legs and one arm, and there's just gore and blood around him, but he's still yelling about how this is very, like, they're savages, this is not how samurai fight, and he's screaming at them, and that's when Nagakado comes up and beheads him. And it's all punctuated with Mariko saying to Blackthorn, this means war. Like, a war just started because of this. Taranaga's son has just done this. Because Blackthorn actually wants to step in and stop them, and Mariko's like, no, don't intervene. So, yeah, I obviously it's a really fun ending, but the reason why it's darkly funny to me, and the look on Yubashige's face the entire time, because now any hope he had of convincing Ishido that he was like still on his side has literally just blown up. It's just been cannoned, right? How is he ever going to tell Ishido that he's still on his side when under his watch at his village, Ishido's whole team were cannoned and killed brutally? And that was the humor at the end to me, is that Yubashige has no hope in hell of convincing the guy he wants to be partnered with that he's still his partner. It's almost like he's going to be forced to be loyal to Taranaga, because what else can he do at this point? So very, very interesting seeing this. It's especially, I think, satisfying as an episode capper because we spent a lot of the episode with Blackthorn teaching them about the cannons, to see it used effectively at the end and see how brutal it actually is when they're not just hitting wooden boards is actually kind of a nice like ending to it. So I also enjoyed Blackthorn just casually swearing and saying awful things to the guys that he doesn't like, but smiling and bowing as he does it it's not to arouse suspicion that he's being unpleasant. So I thought that was fun too. I thought it was another good episode. I probably didn't like it quite as much as episode 3 overall. I thought 3 made a lot of big strides to get me on board, but I think this did advance a lot of the character plots. I think Fuji is a more interesting character now. We see her having to put up with the burden of this new task, but trying to tackle it with grace and like to the best of her ability. I think her relationship with Blackthorn's kind of sweet, even if the actual romance is going to be Blackthorn and Mariko. I thought that was all pretty solid, and really enjoyed how those scenes were directed and performed for the most part. It's yeah, it's a good episode. It's a good show. I don't know. I don't know what sort of point I'm trying to round up to. Sometimes I put myself in a corner where I need to try and tie a bow in the thought process, and then like I'm done. That's the end of the review, everyone. Thank you very much. You can, of course, tell me what you think of the episode in the comments. Like, subscribe, all the usual things. Ding the bell for notifications. Yada, 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 all the usual YouTube stuff. You can support everything as well and help out immensely by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting over there with a little bit of money, and it helps keep the lights on, it helps keep all the reviews coming. So thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. I'll see you again next week. Although I'll see you tomorrow for Constellation, if you're watching the show from Apple. Doing that too. That's me. Thank you once again. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?